So, good morning to everyone. Can you hear me well? Is the micro starting? Is the micro working? It's not, right? Hello. Yeah. Good morning, everyone. The name of this panel is Rethinking Leadership. I'm going to explain briefly why this is important for me and why I'm here. My name is Borja Santos, and I'm the Executive Director of the School of Global and Public Affairs. So I work in a university, it's called IE, that is based in Madrid. Although it's based in Spain, it's pretty international. It has more than 100 nationalities. And this issue is very important because 65% of our students are female, are women. And we usually tell them and inspire them that they are going to be the leaders of tomorrow. But how we can tell them that they are going to lead in the private sector when we know that, you all know the statistics, that out of the 500 biggest companies, only 5% of them have a woman as a CEO? Or how we can tell the students that they are going to lead in the public sector when, in average, only 24% of the parliamentarian seats are held by a woman? Or how we can tell them they are going to lead in the academics when in Europe, for example, when you analyze the full professional level, only 20% of them are women. So last Friday, we have the graduation, and you can imagine, myself and my colleagues, we have 1,000 students. Class of 2019, congratulations. I'm thrilled to congratulate you. This is the graduation of an excellent generations of leaders of tomorrow. But I'm sorry to tell you that 65% of this group will have less chances to be that kind of leader. So how do we fight in the university to prepare our female and men for these challenges? When we know that it is quite complex and it depends on different dimensions, it depends on the culture and the country where they come from, and we have more than 100 nationalities. It depends from which companies they have been working before or they're going to work, because the organizational practices are also quite different in this case. Or it depends as well on individual behaviors and the families where they were raised. So how do we work with that if there are different complex layers? So that's why we have this excellent panel of speakers, and we are going to give light about these issues. So we are going to start a little bit by country level, and we will go down to tackle all the different dimensions. And the first one, we have Michelle Harrison, CEO of Qatar Public. And I'm really thrilled because they have published the Reykjavik Index for Leadership that probably you can find behind. And it's an amazing research because, if I'm correct, it measures the extent to which men and women are viewed equally in terms of suitability of individuals for positions of power. So they have research in the G7 countries, what is the perception of women and men about the suitability, if both of them are equally be possible to be a leader in their countries and in different sectors. And I want to ask you some questions about the highlights of this index. For example, it says that in the G7, more than half of the people, 54% in the G7, are not very comfortable with having a woman as a CEO. Or 57%, very similar, they don't feel comfortable with having women as a head of government. And this is in average, but actually in men is 63%, but in women is around 50%. So also women as well, although in a less percentage, feel in some cases that they are not suitable to be a CEO or a head of government. So how do you feel, or why these percentages are so high?
Thank you. I don't know why I'm smiling, because there's nothing positive about the findings. So just to step back a little bit, so the Reykjavik Index for Leadership was launched last year at the Women Leaders Global Forum in Reykjavik, with the support of that group in partnership with us and the Prime Minister for Iceland, who you probably are aware that gender issues are part of Iceland's foreign diplomatic mission in terms of what they're trying to achieve. So the Reykjavik Index, when we launched last year, it's just for the G7 group of countries. We're extending that at the moment, and we're doing research at the moment in India and China. But it is a measure, as you said, of how men and women are perceived in terms of their suitability for leadership. So it is a measure of perception, not a measure of outcome. It looks at the whole population of working age, and we we researched many thousands of people across the G7. So it's a score of 0 to 100. A score of 100 would mean that men and women in that particular country were viewed as equally suitable for leadership. And across the G7, the index score was 66. Now, there's there's an information session at the morning break, so there'll be a lot more information there. So to get to those points that you made, yes, it is 54% of working age adults across the G7 say that they are not very comfortable with a female as a corporate leader. So if they're not very comfortable, that means that they are not able to feel that it doesn't matter whether it's a woman or a man. And there's an issue of dissonance across every measure that we looked at. Women are in every measure we looked at, they are more comfortable than men with women being viewed as equally suitable for leadership. But there is still, in that instance, nearly half of women across the G7 are not entirely comfortable with women as CEOs. So 60% of men, 48% of women, dissonance, but what we may say is the overwhelming issue is an overall societal lack of comfort with women in very senior leadership positions. And when it comes to political leadership, there is a 57% acceptance that women and men would be equally good at leading politically, but 65% of men are not comfortable with that. 65% of men across the G7 are not entirely comfortable with the idea of a female head of state. So put those figures aside, we've been able to look at the G7 countries in terms of where they sit compared to each other. The index takes account of the number of times that people say they don't mind that men and women are equal. It looks at the dissonance between men and women in how they answer those questions, and it looks at the situation across 20 different economic and professional sectors. Last year was the first time we did it, so it forms a baseline, and we will continue to try and improve the way that the questions are being asked. But just overall, very quickly, the G7 breaks down into two groups, an average of 66. So I suppose you could say if you were on a 100-kilometre journey, everything's fine until the 67th kilometre, and then you hit a wall of prejudice, really, is kind of what happens. But for once, Britain is doing relatively well compared to other nations in terms of cultural issues that they're wrestling with. Britain actually comes out with the highest Reykjavik index. It is closest to viewing men and women as equal, and that's a score of 72. And then we have France and Canada and the US all above average. And then we have a very significant drop to the other three G7 nations, and that's Japan, and then Germany, and then Italy. And I think Germany stood out as the one that was a big surprise in many ways, a score overall of 59. It's a very significant difference to Britain. So I'll leave it there so that you can ask other questions. But what it is then, and we believe it's the first comprehensive measure of this issue of perception, and it allows us to understand the gap between where public policy has been defining equality, but the gap with our culture and social norms supporting those public policy ideals.
And it's interesting, actually, that in this case, in the G7, UK and Germany both have a woman as a head of government, but their perception varies quite a lot, right?
Yes. I think it's... So you can have a woman CEO, and that will not make that corporation be a gender-neutral environment. That's just, you have a female leader, and you might start to make progress, but it's not enough. Or you have a female head of state, that is not enough to make people feel that the battle has been won, or even that they feel comfortable with it. So individual instances of breakthrough appointments do not signal social, that social norms have changed.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much, Michelle. Ranjit, he's the president of Lee Hecht Harrison, and your company has done as well a very interesting research called Elevating Women in Leadership, where you have been serving 230 senior level executive positions in the US. And there is also very interesting highlights here because based on your research, you shows that in the gross majority of the companies, 82% of them, the individuals agree that promoting women into senior executive positions is good for the business. However, when you ask them if they are satisfied with the organizational results, only 28% of them are satisfied. That means that although they have a belief that is positive, then it looks like it's not working in the organization. So why so many organizations fail in these challenges?
Absolutely, and I think similar to the statistic you were just quoting, Michelle, the numbers obviously are shocking, right? And I think they show that there is a clear gap between perception and the evidence, the business evidence, the business case, right? You mentioned that too, and the fact that there is no action, right? And the action is missing at three levels, based on our research and also the evidence we see working with our customers day to day. It is around culture, and there are huge gaps in terms of action and culture, and I will get back to that, what the gaps are there. Practices, and then individual behaviors of men and women, right? If you think of the aspect of culture, I would say the easiest way to frame the gap in action there is that companies don't walk the talk, right? So there is a lot of PR, but there is very little walking the talk, right? So what does it mean? Pay gaps, good example. People know in most companies how much they earn relative to their peers. They might not know the exact number, right? But there is always a perception and understanding of where you stand. Not closing these pay gaps, not addressing these issues, typically will be felt and will have a cultural impact. So walking the talk around topics that is absolutely critical. Practices, and I'm not thinking of page-long, long-winded policies, but practices, for example, in succession planning. If you do not have clear rules around succession planning, that you have to have an equal panel of potential successors. So say if you have a rule in a company, as many companies have, for every leadership position, you need to have 2 to 3 identified successors at any given moment in time. If you do not actually say that 1 to 2 of these needs to be female, you will have a gap, right? And so again, from a practices point of view, we are not speaking of long-winded policies, but really very practical things. And then individual behaviors. Our research has shown that on the female side, self-advocacy and having a clear career plan are probably the 2 key tools to ensuring progress. On the male side, you're also talking of very practical practices on a day-to-day level. I think somebody actually mentioned that yesterday. At what time do you set meetings? Right? So this is probably one of the best examples. Typically, unfortunately, right, it is the women who are looking after the kids. If you set meetings at 6 p.m. in the evening, you are automatically excluding a significant number of the female leaders, potential leaders in an organization, right? And so, these are things which we have seen, which are, really reflective of this action gap, which companies need to address. And why do they need to address it? I think the question came up earlier this morning. There is overwhelming evidence that a diversity of thought at a board level, at a senior leadership level, leads to better business results. There's overwhelming evidence for that, right? So having that diversity in the leadership, diversity of thought, automatically means diversity of gender, diversity of background, diversity of ethnicity. Having that is critical to innovation, is critical to growth, and is critical to your bottom line.
And sorry, when you were surveying, especially women that are considered to be in executive leadership position, do they face similar challenges, or in some case they face different challenges and you tackle them differently?
Absolutely, I think there are clearly different challenges that a senior woman will be facing when, for example, being in an application process for a senior role. Right? And a lot of it just comes down to the fact that they are women, right? And there are a lot of myths and prejudices in that selection process, right? There are unconscious biases, and probably the key to changing that is making sure that senior leaders, not just at a junior level, right, but senior leaders are very conscious of their biases, right? And ensuring that that consciousness is there is probably key to shifting that. But yes, absolutely, senior women face more adversity in a selection process. Yeah.
And when the company, apart from the survey, has been helping other institutions or private companies in this case to promote female leadership, what are the lessons learned that the company have acquired?
So I think a couple of the lessons which I've already mentioned, right, ensuring that you're really working on your succession planning and have practical tools there. I think the example which we saw earlier today with Unilever, which is all around creating awareness around your unconscious biases. Those are very practical tools which can be applied. Again, I think it's walking the talk, right? So not the PR, not the long-winded policies which help.
Thank you, Rani. And Rose, you are coming from Plan International, and as well there is a very interesting research in this case about individual young women, right? And you have been interviewing 10,000 girls from 19 countries. The research is called "Taking the Lead: Achieving True Equality in Leadership." So, why it's important to understand the perceptions of girls and young women in leadership?
Given the lack of progress that we are seeing in having equal representation in leadership, whether it be in political space, in the private sector space, or even in the community, we decided as a international children's rights organisation that works with children and young people across the world, particularly around gender equality and girls' rights, that we needed to hear their voices. We really needed to understand what their perceptions were. If we are expecting them to take up positions of leadership, we wanted to understand, well, what is their perception of being a female leader? What does it look like? What encourages them and what puts them off? So we teamed up with the Gina Davis Institute for Gender and Media, and we spoke with 10,000 girls around the world and of the ages 15 to 25. And what we found is that girls actually do aspire to be leaders. 76% of girls said that they did have aspirations to become leaders. And actually, even more encouragingly, that they have confidence in their own ability to lead. 95% of them felt that they had the ability. So they're ready and they're keen. However, what they were much less confident about was how the world around them would receive them as female leaders. So this fits very well with what we've been discussing this morning. They're very aware of the gender discrimination, the gender biases, the gender norms that we're all socialized within, and which dictate to them the sorts of things that they should be aspiring to do, that they cannot do. And they're very influenced by those. And as they get older, their aspirations to become leaders start to dwindle as they become more aware of those of the barriers facing them. So what we found was around 60% of girls actually believe that female leaders have to work harder than male leaders to gain respect as a leader. And 93% of girls actually believe that female leaders will experience unwanted physical contact. They will experience sexual harassment. That's pretty off-putting as a girl who may have aspirations to be a leader. So they see women's leadership as being much tougher. They see women leaders as being treated more harshly and being criticised more heavily than male leaders. And that acts as a significant barrier. What we also found was that girls themselves actually have their own narrative around leadership. And this speaks a little bit to the very interesting conversation this morning around unstereotyping and women's leadership traits that was being referred to. So girls actually do not recognize or aspire to leadership that's about control and power and hierarchy and leading for your own gain and your own benefit. What they aspire to and what they look for in a role model leader is leadership for the common good, for social justice. These are priorities for them. That people who lead with compassion, who listen and respect other people's views, and who empower others through their leadership. So these are the sorts of leadership traits and characteristics that they consider to be very important. And I think it's very important that we reflect on how we as leaders are actually role modeling those sorts of leadership traits and whether they are actually seeing that around them. So I think we really, really do need to understand that the age is actually very important. The window of adolescence is actually a window in which we should be concentrating on nurturing and supporting the aspirations that girls and young women actually have to try and address the concerns they have and prevent their decline in aspiration.
So I guess Plan International as well advocate for policy recommendations. So in this case, based on the findings of this research, what would you recommend us as leader here and for the leadership community to do based on these findings?
I actually think, excuse me, as leaders ourselves, we are in a very privileged position. We hold power, and I think we have a responsibility to use that power to actually bring about the change that we're talking about, to really walk the talk as individual leaders ourselves. So I think we need to be looking at how are we role modeling the different style and narrative of leadership that girls can relate to and aspire to. We need to look and question, are we leading with compassion? Are we being respectful? Are we opening up spaces for young female leaders to gain some experience? One of the things that girls identified as being so important to them was actually having a bit of practice and some experience, early on in school, in the community, maybe in the family, so that they can build their confidence and build their leadership skills. And then they need the opportunity to exercise that. So I think we need to be looking at how in our workplaces and in our organizations, we can be stepping aside a bit as leaders and making space for young women to exercise their leadership skills. Girls were also emphasizing the importance of support mechanisms. So I think and safe spaces where they can talk to each other around the challenges that they have and the changes that they want to see. And I think we need to be making sure that within our own organizations, we're looking at the networks and support that is available and putting in place opportunities to support young women. Role models is very important, so mentoring arrangements between women who are already in leadership positions and connecting them up with younger women and girls to make that intergenerational connection is also, I think, very important. And I think we also ought to be, if we're talking about bringing in talent to our organizations and our companies and so on, why not talk to the girls and young women before they're making their job applications to ask them, what is it that entices you to work in our organization? What are the issues that you are facing that hold you back? And really help them begin to solve the problems that really do need to be addressed in terms of challenging the gender discrimination that they experience.
Thank you, Rose. So we have been analyzing research and data from country level, from companies, from individual perspectives, from young and leaders and girls. And now with Jurga, I like this part like as a personal example because you have funding, and you are the CEO of a big company, GitHawk, sorry. And as a successful business entrepreneur, you also employ a lot of women in your company. So what are the practices that you are applying now in your company? Having had yourself like many challenges or having experienced some of these challenges that we have been speaking.
Probably, good afternoon or good morning, everybody. It's a subject that everybody has been talking about for such a very long time, and I thought that there must be some truth in terms of using female talent, and I realized that it's definitely beneficial to the business. So whilst everybody's talking about it, we're doing it, and that's a big difference. So I think we pushed it so far that my entire board now almost made of female. So I have another problem. I need diversity, I need more men. And I'm struggling to recruit very good, talented men actually to join our board and to keep up with the pace that women operate. And all these, or most of the women, actually grown from very junior levels. I made a decision, conscious decision, I've been running my organization for 20 years, to invest in talent within and bring talent from outside when we need it. When we're actually growing so fast and we can't really grow our own talent. So we have various aspects in place in terms of from mentoring to training, but training at individual level. Not necessarily about talking that, okay, yes, we're female, we need this kind of training or the other. Looking at the skill set, just like normal businesses should do, and putting them in the places, positions where they flourish. We set them to flourish, not to fail. So yes, you have to change the business model as well, and the perceptions and all these kind of things that the girls encounter, women encounter at different levels. We all have doubts, probably more so than men, but once we actually find the way to deal with those ambiguous assumptions, we actually can flourish. And role models are incredibly important, and I think it starts from the family side as well. So it's not about, we often refer to our business as a family, a big family. Some people feel very comfortable about it, some people don't. And I'm still working out exactly why not. Because I think once you are working for an organization, your entire family has vested interest. And the organization has a vested interest to support that family, to make sure that they have happy environment. I know it sounds blue sky thinking, I'm not running a FTSE 500 company yet. I'm sure I will be, with all the female power that we employ. And from my point of view, actually walking the walk is the most important thing. And to me, I'm sitting there thinking, all these bright men and women and talking about the same thing, you know, goodness sake, 227 years ago, we got the vote. Not the vote, 101 years ago we got the vote. 227 years ago, Mary Wollstonecraft already talked about gender inequality 227 years ago, and we're sitting here on this podium today and we're still talking about it. 77 years ago, Lyudmila Pavlichenko from Ukraine went to Chicago to address the crowd in 1942. And you know what she said? Actually, I think I'm probably going to quote, which I actually was quite taken by. She said, "Gentlemen, I'm 25 years old and I have killed 309 fascist occupants by now. Don't you think, gentlemen, that you have been hiding behind my back for too long?" And I think there's some truth in it. I took from my point of view, I can talk about the programs that we have, and I emphasize on the concept of individualistic approach and treating every single woman and girl according to their skill set and their potential. And one day, I think we will reach that equilibrium where we're all happy and people feel confident and comfortable with female leaders. And I am optimist because I suppose things will have to move forward, because Bank of England says that we have a massive issue in our recruitment challenges in the United Kingdom. We are talking about this, one of the most developed countries, and we actually talk about female equality, yet we're not addressing data in the right way. Yes, we need researchers. Yes, we need data. I'm all for it because I also code. I'm a software developer. This is my hobby, by the way, now. So, and I believe in data set, but I think most of all, I believe in common sense. Most important thing that we human possess is a common sense. Yes, we need the data. We will never have perfect sets of data, but we just need, what we need to do, we just need to look around, look at what we're doing right, what we're doing wrong, and then just set examples and follow those.
And so one of the outputs of this forum is to provide recommendations for the G20. So based on your experience, what the G20 could do realistically to help women, to promote women to be in leadership positions?
I think we need more laws and more regulations and for quotas. I think if we realizing already that there is a benefit, clearly we're already halfway through. So the only thing we need mechanisms and we need regulation. And I think we should insist that women should be on boards, women should be representatives of communities, and should be a law. And most important, I think, as well, we really need to invest in family units. And everybody will say, well, we don't have enough money. We spend everything on various kind of things. Well, I think we do have money and we still have capacity. One thing we need to do is pay more tax. And once we pay more tax, it means that actually we can invest in our family units, provide childcare. Why on earth we've still, in the 21st century, developed countries are struggling with childcare, for goodness. We still, some of my staff, worrying about whether they have grandmothers, worrying whether they have grandmothers to look after their children. And it shouldn't be something that we feel apologetic about to have a family. We have to support families. And I think for G20, we really need to look at childcare, and I think everything will start falling into places.
So, before the round of Q&A, so what is the advice that you would give to a young woman who would be like you were 20 years ago, founding a new company? What would be the advice that you would give them?
Again, I suppose I work with lots of young women. I speak to as many young women as I actually can find and try to find out what exactly ticks. And I try to find the aspiration at individual level. Again, this is not statistic. This is an individual approach. And from my point of view, I always give one and single advice to all women. Be authentic. Be yourself, and you will win. There's no reason to try to project somebody else's leadership styles and all these kind of things. And I think quite often it becomes a barrier because we think, okay, role model. So role model is I have to be like that person. No, I have to be authentic. I can learn from these different people. And I always say, if I actually was that good actress, I will be probably in Hollywood by now. I'll be collecting my Oscar. So I suppose, there's a profession for that. And I think from my point of view, what it's important for girls to understand that it's okay to be authentic. It's okay to be different. And actually, we as society need to celebrate that difference.
Thank you, Jurga. Thank you very much. So maybe we can have a round of questions, 2 or 3. One there.
Hi, my name is Simone Ishikawa. I work at JP Morgan Asset Management. Thank you for the panelists for an exciting debate. I admire your pink suit. It's fabulous. I just wanted to actually ask a couple questions, actually. So we're talking about leadership. I've been in the financial services industry for the last 15 years. I've done the returnship. I've done the whole slew of things. We have quite a lot of balance on top and at the bottom. The areas that we find actually women are just not there at all is in the middle. So, of course, there's been lots of focus on the leadership and women on boards as an initiative, but is there anything that's getting done on the middle part? And I know it doesn't sound like, it's not the women in the middle doesn't sound as good as women on boards or leadership, but what's there to address the pipeline problem? And then I guess secondly, in your company, it's great to see that, women are dominant groups. Is there any dynamic that you see happening in where there's male-dominant industry? So let's say, in finance, men are a lot more dominant in many cases, and women feel dislocated as a result of that. And do you see that happening in your organization? If it's not, what are some of the recommendations that these male-dominant industries can take from your experience?
Well, maybe let's make the round. You were there, here, and there, and then we do another round.
Thank you for the interest panel. I'm Stephanie. I work in diversity. My question is to Rosamund. Did you find any difference in girls of color in terms of the research that you did?
Thank you. Then let's make one third and fourth, and then we do another round.
My question to Besmal Qassar, WMF Forum. My question to Rosamund and Jurka. So what would be your response to the narrative of women need to work harder than men to reach leadership positions? What can we say to little girls? Can we keep saying that narrative, although it's not fair? And what is the alternative?
There was a last one there.
Good morning, I'm Pilar Domingo from the Overseas Development Institute. I want to prompt anybody on the panel to reflect on recommendations that are beyond awareness raising and more about actually changing incentive structures to motivate more structural changes within whichever organization, to see it in their interest to promote women, to create an enabling context for women to encounter less barriers to access decision-making roles and leadership positions.
Thank you, Pilar. So who wants to start?
I'll probably start on the industry question in terms of female. Yes, we keep talking about we don't have enough women engineers, we don't have women enough programmers. Actually, I think the problem is much broader. I don't think we have industries, there are some probably we have larger clusters or female leaders that you will see, but I think in general, most of the industries have the same issue, and even, I suppose, perceived by society that these are primarily female-led type of industries as a PR or even language side of it. So when I was looking to acquire businesses, and when you look at the ownership, still very few women actually run language businesses. So there we go. So even my entire industry that I represent, I thought was predominantly female. It's not. So I think the issue is across industry. Yes, we will have, by definition, probably more traditionally male type of industries, and we see more male leaders there. But actually, if you really think about it, just across the corner from this building, Ada Lovelace used to live. So when you really think about it, is IT female or male industry still a questionable thing? Because I meet lots of great developers who are female, and they are running really successful businesses as well in this IT predominantly perceived as a male type of industries. So on the women need to work hard a bit, that's an interesting question. I don't think we need to work harder, we need to work smarter. And what I mean by that is that we should really, again, go back to the question of authenticity. We should not be shy of our gift of leadership. And in one of the reports of G20, Osaka Leaders Declaration, women were seen as peacemakers as well. So I haven't seen that before. So it's an interesting also area to explore and look at. So from my point of view, I think women, yes, have to work, but then in business, in leadership position, in most of the areas that you look at, if you want to achieve, you have to work hard. You really have to work hard. And if you look at how many businesses, we're talking about entrepreneurship side of it, how many businesses are starting up in this country? A lot. And only 80% survive first year. So are they not working hard enough, or the business environment is a little bit shaky as well? If you really look, we keep talking about the finances, access to finances and all these kind of things. When I mentor new businesses coming to me and talking about about their businesses, what they want to achieve, and I start talking about profit and generating revenue. And they look at me as if I landed from a different land, because the revenue model is not even covered, because we're so focused on raising finances and so focused about where the next money going to come in to actually invest in, so I can invest in my next idea without thinking what impact am I going to make. As for incentive side of it, I think we already have enough incentives. We already have enough data to prove that women are good for business. What else do we need?
So, in response to your question around where there are differences of perspectives for girls of colour, it was a 19-country study and covering lots of different low, middle, and high-income countries, and there were, although the overall statistics I were quoting were the sort of high-level ones, there were regional differences. What's really interesting, the sort of standout difference actually, was around, because we asked girls about their aspirations to lead in their family, and the family is absolutely vital, in fact, particularly for role models. I didn't mention that, but it is. In the family, in the community, in the workplace, and your country. And girls from the lower income countries have higher aspiration to lead their country than girls from the higher income countries. Now, the research doesn't tell us why, but it's a very interesting finding, I think, and something that we obviously need to get under the skin of and investigate more. Also, I think this is probably quite logical, but the higher education girls have and their higher socioeconomic status, also the higher their ambition and their confidence to lead, which just reinforces the importance of education, quality education for girls. On the issue around what do you say to a young girl about, girls, women have to work harder to be respected as leaders. For me, that is really an issue around the stereotypes and perceptions that people have of females as leaders, and our sort of conditioning by those negative stereotypes that tell us that girls are not, or women shouldn't be leaders. They don't make decisions well enough, clearly enough, etc. That they're not they're not meant to be in the places of position and power. And I think that's what we need to be challenging in terms of those perceptions. And we need to be ensuring that starting within the family, actually, we're looking at how we relate to our sons and our daughters, and how we speak to them, how we encourage and nurture their aspirations, and that we're not unconsciously reinforcing the gender bias and the gender discrimination that we're all socialized within. So I think it's really about looking at the biases and the norms that are pervasive within our own families and society, but also within the cultures of our organizations. And I think looking at the sort of practice within the meeting space, for example. What's the everyday sort of sexism that happens within the meeting room? And who is speaking? Who does get their voice heard? Who gets talked over and interrupted? Are young women being given, are they confident to speak out? And are they being given the opportunity to speak out in meetings? What are the conversations that are happening in around the coffee or water cooler? What is the sort of vibe that young women are being exposed to and they're picking up? I think all of those sorts of things we really, really need to be recognizing and consciously acting to change.
Just to comment on the issue of women in the middle. So I think there is, but obviously I haven't got the data on that, but I know it's a great concern because we lose the pipeline of women coming through. And I think if we just think about the G7 countries, this issue of having to work hard and how that gets associated with motherhood. So that gap in the middle is often about us losing women and them not returning. So I think there's a pretty toxic view still, mainstream view, that women who work very hard damage their families. And I think, and that goes back to childcare, but it's something more than that. It's a cultural perception, and I think until we uncouple that, the idea that working hard is damaging rather than working hard is something you do to help look after your family, I think we're in a bit of a vicious cycle, at least in the G7 countries on that.
Thank you.
Maybe just one comment on the question around incentives. Clearly, I mean, you get what you measure, right? So yes, you need to link. I don't disagree that there are sometimes too many incentives in place, right? But then you need to choose the right incentives. You need to set up the incentive structure in a simple enough way. But you have to put certain incentives in place, right? And to give you a simple example, I was talking earlier about having a proper succession plan in place. This can be a criteria for promotion, right? So a leader who does not have those criteria in place, or who does not have the succession plan in place according to the criteria I mentioned earlier, isn't eligible for promotion, right? So that's a simple incentive which you can put in place.
Thank you, Ranjit.
Can I just say something about that?
Sure.
Just, I can't find the statistic, but girls were asked about whether they view female leaders as being good mothers. And actually, I think it was around 80-something% actually do believe that female leaders can also be good mothers.
So let's have a second round, and I think we have 1, 2, 3, and 4, and 5, and then we close it with this.
Thanks. This has been most interesting, and I liked. My name is Dorothy Gordon, and I'm an associate fellow at Chatham House. Rosamond, I found your statistics quite interesting about developing countries, and I just wanted to remind us that there's a particular model of patriarchy which is European and perhaps linked a bit to the US because of English. And there are different forms of patriarchy in other places. In my country, women being able to be leaders is not in question. Traditionally, we are leaders. But now when you get into the modern westernized space, then you fall victim to all the other stereotyping that's coming from that particular thing. And I think that we have to watch out for it more and more, because we are on the internet. And if you look at the kind of stereotypes that are being promoted through algorithmic bias and all the other stuff, there are new dangers coming up for young girls, telling them that, yeah, you should be a supermodel, you should be into makeup, this is what you should be interested in. But what I have found is that we have a lot of material available. You're talking about what happens in a meeting. When my daughter was 13, I gave her a little binder with all the behaviors that you will observe as a woman in a meeting, being talked over, etc. We have that material that can be shared with girls to prepare them so that they don't feel, because what I've found is women become disheartened when they feel that it's me. They have to recognize these are trends. We've observed them. They're case studies that you can analyze on the kind of behaviors you would experience in the workplace that may make you feel less than you are, and you have to combat them. And I would really like people to comment on this, as well as the longitudinal surveys that we've done, which have tracked the progression, career progression. We have all of this stuff out there. So why aren't we making more progress? Why isn't that information being disseminated more widely?
Thank you. Okay.
Hi, my name is Lily. I'm head of political and public affairs at the Quebec Government Office here in London. So I'm going to speak more on a personal level, and actually to talk a bit more about the women in the middle. So I'm 36. I have 2 young kids, 2 years old and 6 years old. And this morning I was going to replace my boss at a board meeting at 8 a.m. In the city. And my husband is at home right now with my youngest one. He's on parental leave. And actually, we have very good policies of childcare, low-cost childcare, and parental leave in Quebec. And but I'm still struggling. So, what can I do to actually address this question of tackling leadership and spark change? So, thank you.
My name is Salma Abbasi, and I'm the CEO and chairperson of eWorldwide Group. I would like to, first of all, appreciate the panelists' views, and especially the recommendation that Rosamund has made. I'm a technologist. I'm a civil engineer, electrical engineer, and my PhD's in ICTs. So I am a techie all the way through from the 80s when I was one of two girls in university studying. You can't imagine, the second girl was from Iran. But what I want to say is I am so tired of listening again to the policy and what we need to do, what data we need to get. I think we should talk about some practical, tactical actions that we can take as women, as leaders. And reading what it said here about children, I wanted to put forward a few very simple recommendations which I think you can sort of reflect on and see how it can be integrated into your own organizations and into the data. And a couple are, in the context of us being role models ourselves and allowing the uniqueness of each individual, we need to actually actively create the space. And what I mean by that is, as the chairperson, I go and participate a lot on UN platforms around the world, and I take staff with me. I make the space for people to come and see and participate in the debates. That's one. The second thing is we have several interventions with schools. And with that, we create ambassadors within communities, girls and boys, to give them that platform. Obviously, I have a bias towards girls, making space for girls, but to bring them to the table and set up joint forums with UN. The colleague who spoke earlier from UNESCO, we've done many events with UNESCO where we funded and brought young girls to come and discuss and listen to the forums and how policies are being made, how it's going to impact their future. And the third thing is in the context of social media. I am horrified. Yesterday, a lady, the photographer, was talking about how I remember when they used to see a red Ferrari and a girl was in hot pants, and it used to disgust me that, shit, that is going to sell a car? I don't think so. And then there was a lady with the buttons open on a blouse selling the cigarettes for players. I'm talking a long time ago. But today, it's even more disgusting when you see the songs and you listen to the lyrics that girls are listening to. It's all about sex, and it's all about girls' sexual exploitation. So now, in schools and things that we teach and show our young people, both boys and girls, we are going to have to operate on multiple levels to change and break the new wave of terror that is coming through social media that we can't even police properly as parents in the developed world, in the G7, as you mentioned. So if you think about the developing countries, it's an even more bigger challenge to protect the girls and create that avenue and interventions that bring them to the table that you want to bring them to. Thank you.
Yes, two last one. If you don't mind trying to be brief, so otherwise.
Hi, Ambika from Acumen, and my question, I guess, is for Michelle and Jurga, which is, what is, in your opinion, what is the role of men in rethinking leadership? And I asked that doing a quick head count of the men in the actual room. There's probably about just under 10. And so you cited that 200 years ago, this conversation was still valid around gender equality. It's on the SDGs. But are we bringing the whole population to the conversation so that it becomes holistic? Or are we continuing to converse and have conversations with those that are already in the same boat as us? So yes, what's the role of men in this role?
Thank you. And then was the last one there? Just one more, sorry. And then if you can think about your answer in 1 minute, because we need to leave before 11:30, otherwise the agenda is very packed.
I loved the comments on tactically what can women do to support girls. There's a fabulous study, a case study in Harvard Business School, where 30% of the 30% of the student population was female. 50% of the grade is based on class participation and contribution and 50% on exams. But consistently for decades, women scored lower on their class participation grades, but equally on exams. So what was the disconnect? And they did some really proactive tactical things. Number one, preparing girls and young women. How do you behave where you're being talked over by your male colleagues in a classroom situation? And you're fighting for acknowledgement and recognition for what you're saying. So they prepped young women to better perform in those environments, but more importantly, they took the ability for the predominantly male professors to score the quality of the contribution. They had scribes enter the classroom and blindly acknowledged or attributed comments without gender or name. So then when the professors are looking at the quality of the comments, they don't know who said them. And immediately those class participation scores increased. So unconscious bias, there's no evil here, it's unconscious bias. They're hearing stuff and they're attributing it to other people, or they're not hearing it in the same way once it's blinded. And the third thing is they really push to have female professors, not only teaching the case methods courses, but also better prepared to be more effective in those environments. So there's great tactical things that we can all do, men and women, to support girls to find their voice. I mean, my favorite is I often say in my own business, I'm an entrepreneur, please let me know when you're finished interrupting me. And it just like disarms, because I'm talked over all the time. And then everyone has a little laugh, and then I just start talking again.
Thank you very much. Okay, can we do one round of 1 minute, if you don't mind? Sorry.
So I think on the stereotype side of it, and social media is a very, very big question. And yes, we have to be due diligent, but at the same time, and there are very few things we can do as parents, as grandparents, to protect our young from what is happening online. So unfortunately, we keep talking about artificial intelligence, and ICT side of it is fascinating to hear that actually we are talking today. We used to have intelligence systems, and we had machine translation in the 1950s and so forth, and we hope that machines are going to give all the answers to us. Well, I don't think it's going to be happening. I think we need to start using technology in a different way, and we need to really deploy technology better than we do now, not chasing some kind of AI dream that may or may not happen, but to answer your question, we're using technology to create a very flexible work environment in our office. So people don't have to be physically present in certain occasions if we can help. But our aspiration is to make sure that people have that flexibility. And actually, men do play a very important role, because all of us are parents and grandparents, or when we know somebody, we have future to take care of. As a community, as a unit, as a union. And I think we have a role to play, not trying to point fingers at everybody else. And yes, there are so many little things that we can do, make big difference. And I think, again, going back, we should really sort out childcare in this country and other countries, and it will be a stepstone, but it will be a small one, and we'll be seeing big difference.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Julia.
I'm talking on behalf of my staff as well here.
You want to continue?
Not a solution, but a quick reaction. I think you made a great point, right? Preaching to the choir is comfortable, but probably will not drive the progress. So, thinking about how we can get the right people in the room here and ensure that the message is positioned with those people who can help, progress things is critical.
Rose and Michelle?
Yeah, so on the evidence, the information is there. Why are we not acting on it? And the practical steps you can take. Absolutely. I think the leadership teams of organizations need to actually set conscious time aside to understand how are we acting on these things in our own organization, and actually make active commitments to intentionally act on them. Plan International has taken a big inward look at ourselves as an organization and realized we have a long journey to go on. And so we've just, our entire leadership team, more than 100 and however many people, have made a set of commitments to ensuring that young female leaders within the organization will be supported and empowered It involves commitments of leaders, stepping aside, creating platforms, taking opportunities. We took 30 young people to a big global conference called Women Deliver in June. We really are taking active steps to make sure that we're giving young people, young girls and women in particular, voices in the places and spaces where power is made. So I think we just have to be very intentional about it.
Thank you, Rose.
So on the issue of the role of men, I think where I'm at with this is we've probably moved beyond the point where asking for support is not enough. So I have moved full circle, and I fully believe in quotas and in really tough sanctions against businesses that don't act appropriately. That's what I believe now, and I wouldn't have thought that even 5 years ago, I think. And with the woman who is wrestling with kids and everything else, resilience. It gets easier. They just stop waking up in the night. So it's just it's resilience. But I think that you see in women who have managed a career and family period that they are outstanding when they come out the other end in terms of their effectiveness, because it gives you experience you might not otherwise get. So, yeah.
Mm-hmm. So thank you very much. The panel Rethinking Leadership has been tackling research, insights, stories about the 3 different dimensions that Ranjit was mentioning: culture, organizational practices, and individual behaviors. So I want to ask for a big applause for the amazing speakers we have had. And one quick